It is the year 1431. The sun beats down on the dusty Spanish town of Jativa, where stone houses line narrow streets and the smell of bread lingers in the air. Inside one of these modest homes, a child is born. His name, Rodrigo Borgia. No villager could have guessed that this newborn would one day sit on the throne of St. Peter, not remembered for holiness, but for scandal, ambition, and a legacy so dark that it would echo for centuries. Rodrigo's childhood is marked by Spain's dry winds and rough roads, but his destiny lies elsewhere. Rome, the eternal city, waits for him. Rome is not simply a city, it is the heart of faith, the center of politics, the hub of power. It is a place where salvation and corruption walk side by side, where incense smoke mingles with sewage, and where the prayers of pilgrims rise in the same air as the laughter of courtesans. Rodrigo will not just enter Rome, he will master it. Rodrigo's rise begins with family. His uncle, Alfonso de Borgia, is a man already climbing the ladder of the church. In 1455, Alfonso ascends to the papacy as Pope Calixtus III. With his uncle wearing the tiara of St. Peter, Rodrigo's fate is sealed. At just 25 years old, he is appointed cardinal deacon, not for piety, not for devotion, but because nepotism is as old as the church itself. Rodrigo learns a lesson that will shape his entire life. In Rome, holiness is optional, but power is everything. When Rodrigo first arrives in Rome, he is greeted by a city of contradictions. By day, pilgrims kneel before relics, pressing their lips to cold marble, whispering prayers with trembling hands. Inside basilicas, golden light spills across frescoes, making heaven seem close enough to touch. By night, however, the city transforms. Taverns overflow with gamblers rolling dice. Wine spills onto cobblestones as men shout and laugh. Courtesans with deep neck-lined silk gowns linger beneath torchlight, offering more than conversation. Assassins roam, blades glinting, ready to kill for the price of bread. Rome is sacred and corrupt, holy and profane, a city where even salvation itself carries a price tag. Rodrigo does not recoil from this double life of Rome. He embraces it. Where others see scandal, he sees opportunity. He begins collecting ecclesiastical benefices across Europe, positions that bring wealth and influence. With each title, his fortune grows. He spins his influence carefully, like a spider weaving a web, patient and deliberate. Soon, he is not living like a man of God, but like a prince. Rodrigo builds palaces, fills banquet halls, and lives in luxury. His tables shine with silver goblets filled with wine. Platters of roasted meats, fruits, and pastries fill the room. Musicians play long into the night. Mistresses in elegant gowns sit beside him, their laughter echoing across marble halls. Rodrigo lives as if holiness is an afterthought, and Rome takes notice. One mistress, Vanosa de Catane, gives him 4 children, Juan, Cesare, Lucrezia, and Giuffre. To Rodrigo, these children are not simply family, they are pawns in his game of power. Juan, bold but reckless, destined to inherit titles. Cesare, intelligent and ruthless, sharp as a blade. Lucrezia, beautiful and clever, useful in forging alliances. And Giuffre, the youngest, married off into political convenience. Rodrigo sees his family as the foundation of a dynasty that will rule not just the Vatican, but all of Italy. Even in a city desensitized to scandal, Rodrigo shocks observers. His lifestyle becomes infamous, so much so that Pope Pius II himself writes him a scathing letter, condemning his behavior in Siena as a disgrace to the church. But Rodrigo is not a man easily shamed. Shame is for the weak. He has one goal, the papal throne. Opportunity finally arrives in 1492. Pope Innocent VIII dies, and the College of Cardinals gathers for conclave. The Sistine Chapel, not yet painted by Michelangelo, becomes the stage for one of the most corrupt elections in history. 23 cardinals shuffle into secrecy, their whispers heavy with promises. Gold changes hands with the quiet certainty of a stream flowing downhill. Offices are bought, benefices are sold, promises are whispered like prayers. When the smoke rises, the outcome is exactly what many expected. Rodrigo Borgia is elected Pope Alexander VI. Rome erupts. Bonfires blaze across the 7 hills. Torchlit processions wind through narrow streets. Triumphal arches rise overnight. Observers write that the ovation Alexander receives is the greatest ever given to a pope. For a brief moment, Alexander surprises everyone. He orders the streets cleaned of assassins. Over 200 murders had occurred in the months before his election, but now peace returns. He creates districts with magistrates empowered to enforce order. Every Tuesday, he personally hears the grievances of the people. For a short while, it feels as if divine providence may have chosen well. But power reveals character. For Alexander, the papacy is not about God, it is about family. He uses his throne to elevate his children. Juan becomes Duke of Gandia, showered with wealth and titles. Cesare, despite being barely 18, is made Archbishop of Valencia and later a cardinal. Lucrezia is married off to strengthen alliances, her life treated as a political chess piece. Geoffrey, too, is matched with a bride for strategic advantage. The Vatican transforms. It ceases to be a sacred palace and instead becomes the court of a Renaissance monarch. Banquets stretch into the night. Candles glow against frescoed walls. Nobles, ambassadors, and cardinals dine on roasted meats and fine wines. Courtesans with low-cut gowns provide entertainment, their beauty as much a weapon as the swords of soldiers. At the center of this display sits Alexander VI, laughing, drinking, ruling, not as God's vicar, but as the head of a dynasty. But history always has its chroniclers. Johann Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies, records it all. Burchard is not dramatic. His diary is dry, precise, almost clinical, yet that makes it dangerous. He records coronations and processions with the same tone he uses to record scandals. Every word he writes is a blade cutting through centuries, ensuring that the Borgia's deeds will never be forgotten. By the late 1490s, the Borgia name is infamous across Europe. Rumors swirl of cruelty, corruption, and endless ambition. Then in June 1497, tragedy strikes. Juan Borgia, the Pope's beloved son, is murdered. His body is found floating in the Tiber River, stabbed 9 times. The city whispers, was it revenge? A political assassination? Or perhaps Cesare himself, clearing the way for his own ambitions? The Pope is devastated. For 3 days, he refuses food and sleep, weeping behind closed doors. He vows reform. He promises to cleanse the Vatican of corruption, to return the Church to purity. For a moment, Rome holds its breath. Perhaps grief has changed him. Perhaps Alexander will be a holy pope after all. But time erodes grief, and soon the vows are forgotten. The reforms are abandoned. The feasts return. The Vatican once again becomes a theater where sacred vows and profane desires perform their obscene ballet. Meanwhile, Cesare Borgia sheds his cardinal's robes. He was never meant for the church. His talent lies not in prayer, but in power. Brilliant, magnetic, and ruthless, Cesare becomes his father's sword. He wages campaigns across central Italy, conquering territories with both diplomacy and bloodshed. His combination of cruelty and efficiency earns the admiration of Niccolò Machiavelli, who will later use him as the model for the prince. Cesare's rise cements the Borgia's grip on power. But with power comes arrogance, and with arrogance comes the night that will define their legacy forever. By 1501, the Borgias are at their peak. Cesare is feared across Italy, his name whispered with awe and dread. Alexander VI sits firmly on the papal throne, his children married into powerful families. The Vatican overflows with wealth, but power breeds excess, and excess demands spectacle. On an October evening in 1501, inside the private chambers of Cesare Borgia, 50 courtesans prepare for a night unlike any Rome has ever seen. The air is heavy with the scent of roasted chestnuts. Nobles, ambassadors, and cardinals gather, their crimson robes glowing in the candlelight. The frescoes on the walls depict saints and heroes, their painted eyes forced to witness what no holy figure should ever see. Johann Burchard is there, silent, his quill ready. What he records will be hidden for centuries in the Vatican's secret archives, sealed like a forbidden confession. The stage is set, the candles are lit, and Rome is about to witness one of the darkest nights in papal history. When Rodrigo Borgia became Pope Alexander VI in 1492, he did not see himself as a shepherd guiding souls toward heaven. He saw himself as a patriarch, the head of a dynasty that would dominate Italy as surely as monarchs dominated France or Spain. The papacy was not a spiritual office to him, it was a throne, and Rome was not God's city, but his kingdom. From the moment of his coronation, Alexander began weaving his family into the very fabric of European politics. His eldest son, Juan, was given the title Duke of Gandia. His youngest, Geoffrey, was married off to secure alliances in Naples. But it was his two middle children, Cesare and Lucrezia, who would define the Borgia legend, two figures whose names would echo through history as symbols of ambition, beauty, scandal, and intrigue. Cesare Borgia, tall, charismatic, and ruthlessly intelligent, had once worn the robes of a cardinal, but everyone who knew him understood he was no churchman. His passions lay in strategy, warfare, and statecraft. In 1498, he shocked Europe by resigning his cardinal's hat, the first in history to do so voluntarily. With his father's blessing, Cesare traded crimson robes for armor. He became the warrior prince of the papacy, the sword of the Borgia family. Alexander VI supported his son with every tool at his disposal. Church offices were sold, indulgences granted, and favors exchanged. The wealth of the Vatican flowed not into charity, but into Cesare's armies. With French support secured through clever diplomacy, Cesare launched a series of brutal campaigns across central Italy. City after city fell under his control: Imola, Forlì, Rimini, Faenza. His enemies feared him not only for his cruelty, but for his efficiency. Where other rulers hesitated, Cesare struck swiftly, cutting down rivals before they could breathe. Machiavelli, the Florentine diplomat and philosopher, watched Cesare closely. He admired the young man's cunning and decisiveness, later using him as the model for the prince. In Cesare, Machiavelli saw the perfect ruler, ruthless when necessary, generous when it served him, and always calculating. But Cesare's brilliance came at a cost. His methods sowed fear across Italy, and his reputation became as dark as his victories were dazzling. If Cesare was the Borgia sword, Lucrezia was the velvet glove. Blonde, Graceful and politically astute, she became her father's favorite tool for forging alliances. At the age of 13, she was married to Giovanni Sforza, a match designed to secure the loyalty of one of Italy's most powerful families. But when the political wind shifted, Alexander annulled the marriage, claiming Giovanni was impotent. Humiliated, Giovanni spread vicious rumors that the Borgias practiced incest, that Alexander, Cesare, and Lucrezia shared not only power, but forbidden affections. The truth of these rumors has been debated for centuries. Some historians dismiss them as slander spread by enemies. Others note the closeness of the Borgia family, the whispers of strange intimacy, and the shadowy records of nights spent together in the Vatican. Whether true or not, the rumors stuck, staining Lucrezia's name forever. Her second marriage was to Alfonso of Aragon, the illegitimate son of the King of Naples. At first, the union seemed happy, even affectionate, but politics is a cruel game. When Naples ceased to be useful to the Borgias, Alfonso became expendable. In 1500, he was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. Though he survived the first assault, he was later strangled in his bed, likely on Cesare's orders. Lucrezia, forced to smile through her grief, became once again a pawn in her father's ambitions. Her third marriage was to Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, a match that finally gave her stability. In Ferrara, Lucrezia reinvented herself as a patron of the arts, distancing her reputation from the scandals of her youth. But the rumors followed her all the same, making her one of the most infamous women in Renaissance history. While Cesare fought wars and Lucrezia played her part in alliances, Alexander VI turned the Vatican into a theater of excess. The papal apartments glowed with candlelight. Banquets spilled across long golden tables. Cardinals sat side by side with ambassadors, courtesans, and merchants. Music filled the night as dancers in low-cut gowns entertained guests. Wine flowed as freely as the Tiber River. Giulia Farnese, known as Giulia la Bella for her beauty, became the Pope's most famous mistress. Her presence in the Vatican was no secret. She walked the corridors as freely as any cleric, her laughter echoing through rooms meant for prayer. Paintings even depicted her as the Virgin Mary, a scandal that shocked those who still clung to the Church's holiness. Alexander's court was described by contemporaries as a carnival of sin. Sacred vows were ignored. Money was traded for favors. The line between church and state, between holy and profane, vanished completely. But Alexander was not blind to criticism. He simply did not care. For him, power excused everything. The murder of Juan Borgia in 1497 had briefly shaken Alexander. His grief had brought about promises of reform. For a moment, the Vatican seemed poised to cleanse itself of corruption. But grief fades, and ambition endures. Within months, the reforms were forgotten, and Alexander returned to his feasts, his politics, and his relentless support of Cesare. For Rome, Juan's death became just another story whispered in the alleys, another example of the Borgias' ruthless world. But for Alexander, it was a turning point. With Juan gone, all his hopes rested on Cesare. The young man became not just the Pope's son, but his chosen successor in power. Cesare's campaigns reshaped Italy. City-states that had stood for centuries crumbled before him. He ruled not just with soldiers, but with spies, informants, and assassins. Rivals who opposed him often disappeared. Some poisoned, others strangled. Still others found dead in alleys. His reputation grew darker, but his power grew stronger. At the same time, Alexander filled the College of Cardinals with loyalists. He appointed 47 new cardinals during his reign, many chosen not for piety, but for wealth. Each appointment brought thousands of ducats into the papal treasury. Critics accused him of selling salvation itself, turning the church into a marketplace where holiness had a price. Alexander did not deny it. To him, money was simply another tool to strengthen the Borgia dynasty. By 1500, Rome had become both a holy city and a playground of corruption. Pilgrims still flocked to its basilicas, kneeling before relics and whispering prayers. But they could not ignore the whispers in the streets, the Pope's mistresses, the feasts in the Vatican, the blood spilled in Cesare's wars. The faithful prayed, but they also gossiped. The Eternal City was a paradox, its churches filled with incense, while its palaces overflowed with wine. The Jubilee of 1500 brought thousands of pilgrims to Rome, filling the city's coffers with gold. But it also highlighted the contrast between faith and corruption. Pilgrims who came seeking salvation found themselves surrounded by courtesans, soldiers, and merchants eager to profit from their devotion. Alexander VI presided over the celebrations with grandeur, but the moral rot of his court was impossible to hide. By the turn of the century, the Borgias had reached their zenith. Cesare commanded armies. Lucrezia secured alliances. Alexander held the papacy with an iron grip. Their enemies whispered, but their power seemed unstoppable. And yet, arrogance always sows the seeds of downfall. In October 1501, Cesare prepared an entertainment unlike any other. The setting, his private apartments in the Vatican, magnificently decorated with frescoes by Pinturicchio. The walls showed scenes from mythology and scripture, heroes, gods, saints, all destined to watch silently as scandal unfolded. The guest list included cardinals, nobles, and ambassadors. The entertainment, 50 courtesans dressed in silks, ready to perform. The event would become infamous as the Banquet of Chestnuts, a night so scandalous that it would be hidden in the Vatican archives for centuries. Johann Burchard, ever the meticulous observer, was present, quill in hand. His account would preserve the details of a night when the papacy crossed a line so profound that even Rome, accustomed to scandal, was left in shock. The stage was set, the candles flickered, the courtesans laughed, the guests prepared. What followed would stain the reputation of the Catholic Church for generations. The autumn of 1501 settled over Rome with a chill in the air, but inside the Vatican, heat of another kind began to rise. The Eternal City had seen wars, intrigues, and scandals, but what was about to unfold would carve itself into history with unforgettable force. On the night of October 30th, Cesare Borgia prepared an entertainment for his father, Pope Alexander VI, and their most trusted allies. It was no ordinary feast. It was to be remembered, or rather, hidden, for centuries. The setting was Cesare's private apartments, magnificently decorated with frescoes by Pinturicchio. Walls glowed with images of saints, prophets, and ancient heroes, their painted eyes staring down as if powerless witnesses to what was about to occur. Candelabras flickered, throwing pools of golden light and deep shadows across marble floors. Nobles, cardinals, and foreign ambassadors gathered, dressed in velvet and crimson, their anticipation sharpened by wine and whispered rumors. And then came the courtesans, 50 of them, chosen not from common brothels, but from among Rome's most skilled companions, women who knew how to turn seduction into spectacle. Draped in silks that revealed more than they concealed, they moved with elegance, laughter mingling with the music of lutes and flutes. The atmosphere was thick with wine, incense, and desire. Johann Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies, stood quietly in a corner, quill in hand. He was not there to participate but to record, as was his duty. His account, dry, clinical, and unflinching, would later become the only surviving testimony of this night, sealed away in the Vatican archives like a wound the Church wished to forget. Burchard describes how, after the meal was cleared, candelabras were set on the floor, casting strange patterns of light and shadow across the chamber. Chestnuts were scattered between them, rolling across the marble. Then the courtesans, now stripped of their gowns, were ordered to crawl on hands and knees to collect them. The sight, obscene and mesmerizing, burned itself into the memory of every guest. The Pope himself sat and watched, flanked by Cesare and Lucrezia. The daughter's presence has puzzled historians for centuries. Was she complicit, coerced, or simply trapped in the family's web of power? The truth is lost to time, but the scandal has never faded. As the night deepened, the entertainment grew darker. Guests, nobles, courtiers, even cardinals, were invited to participate in competitions. The challenge, to test their virility with the courtesans. Servants, quills in hand, recorded performances as if tallying accounts. Rewards of silken tunics, fine shoes, and jeweled ornaments were promised to the victors. What should have been private became spectacle, intimacy turned into theater, all unfolding under the gaze of the Pope, the man meant to be Christ's vicar on earth. It was an inversion of everything holy. The marble floors meant for prayer, the frescoed walls meant for reverence, the papal chambers themselves now turned into a stage for a spectacle of degradation. And yet, within the moment, none of the participants seemed to care. The wine was strong, the laughter loud, and the Borgias were untouchable. For one night, sin became celebration, and the Church itself was complicit. When dawn crept over Rome, the marble floors were scrubbed clean, the chestnuts gathered, the courtesans gone. Pilgrims still arrived at St. Peter's, kneeling in prayer, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to know, what had taken place only a few steps away. The Pope appeared at audiences as usual, blessing the faithful with the same hand that had raised a goblet of wine over the previous night's feast. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, everything had. Word of the banquet spread quickly through Rome, carried by servants, guards, and courtiers. Soon it reached beyond the city, whispered in the letters of diplomats who had attended or heard from reliable sources. Across Europe, the reaction was one of shock. Even in courts accustomed to vice and indulgence, the idea that the Pope himself presided over such an orgy was staggering. The Banquet of Chestnuts became more than just a rumor. It became a weapon. Reformers across Europe seized upon the story as proof of the papacy's corruption. In Florence, the followers of Savonarola, who had preached fiery sermons against Rome's decadence before being burned at the stake, saw vindication. In Germany, whispers of such scandal planted seeds that would, within decades, bloom into Martin Luther's rebellion. Yet Alexander VI was unshaken. Far from apologizing, he doubled down. He continued to shower titles and territories upon Cesare, to fill the College of Cardinals with loyalists, and to enrich the Vatican coffers through the sale of indulgences and offices. The scandal, rather than humbling him, seemed to liberate him from any pretense of morality. If the world already saw him as corrupt, why not live as he pleased? But power is fragile, and excess always carries a price. By 1503, the Borgia's grip on Italy began to falter. Cesare's campaigns stretched resources thin, enemies multiplied, waiting for the moment when fortune would shift. And fortune, as always, is fickle. In August 1503, a dinner was held at the house of Cardinal Adriano da Corneto. Alexander VI and Cesare both attended. Shortly after, both fell gravely ill. Rumors spread instantly. Had they been poisoned? Some whispered they had intended to poison the cardinal, but had accidentally consumed the poisoned wine themselves. Others insisted it was simply malaria, the swamp fever that plagued Rome every summer. Whatever the truth, Alexander VI did not recover. On August 18, 1503, after 11 years on the papal throne, Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, died. Accounts describe his body as swelling and blackening rapidly, a grotesque reflection of his life. Some said the stench filled the chamber before he even breathed his last. Rome, always quick to celebrate and condemn, reacted with bonfires in the streets. For many, his death was not a tragedy, but a deliverance. Cesare, too, lay ill, but survived. Yet without his father's protection, his empire crumbled. The new pope, Julius II, despised the Borgias and wasted no time dismantling their power. Cesare's enemies rose against him, and he was forced to flee. Once the most feared man in Italy, he died only a few years later, fighting as a mercenary in Spain, his dreams of a kingdom reduced to dust. Lucrezia, the survivor of the family, lived on in Ferrara as duchess, reinventing herself as a respectable patron of the arts. Yet her name, like her father's and brothers, remained forever stained by rumor and scandal. The new pope, Julius II, refused to live in the Borgia apartments where the Banquet of Chestnuts had been held. Instead, he commissioned Raphael to decorate new rooms above them. The Raphael rooms, masterpieces of art that endure to this day. The symbolism was deliberate, to cover over the stains of corruption with beauty, to replace scandal with splendor. But scandal cannot be erased so easily. The Banquet of Chestnuts remained hidden in the Vatican archives, its details locked away. Yet whispers endured, and when the archives were finally opened centuries later, Burchard's dry Latin prose confirmed what had long been suspected. Historians have debated the Banquet of Chestnuts endlessly. Catholic writers of the 19th century tried to dismiss it as exaggeration, arguing that no pope could have allowed such a thing. Protestant writers embraced it as evidence of everything they despised about Rome. Modern scholars tend to accept its core truth while recognizing it as part of a broader culture of Renaissance excess. But beyond the debates lies a simple reality. Alexander VI and the Borgias left behind a reputation of corruption so deep that it became inseparable from their names. The Banquet of Chestnuts is not remembered for its details alone, but for what it symbolized. The moment when the sacred and the profane collided so completely that even the papacy itself seemed irredeemable. As we look back across 5 centuries, the image is haunting. Candlelight flickering over marble floors, courtesans crawling for chestnuts, cardinals laughing as they cast aside their vows, a pope watching from his seat of honor, and all of it recorded by a silent man with a quill, ensuring that history would never forget. The Borgias remind us of the eternal tension between power and morality, between the sacred and the corrupt. They built cathedrals and sponsored art, but they also turned the Vatican into a palace of vice. They sought to secure their dynasty, but instead left behind a cautionary tale. The Banquet of Chestnuts was more than a scandal. It was a mirror reflecting humanity's capacity for both greatness and degradation. The chestnuts scattered across those marble floors were gathered up before dawn, but the questions they raised remained scattered across history. How much power corrupts? How far can ambition go before it destroys itself? And can faith survive when its leaders fall so low? The candles of that night burned out long ago. The courtesans are dust, the guests long buried, the Borgias themselves gone. But the echoes of laughter, of scandal, of sin and spectacle still linger in the memory of the eternal city. Rome, the city of saints and sinners, remembers, and so does history.